for all.
Okay, that brings us to recognition. Does anybody have a recognition for tonight?
I'm not sure that we have recognized our school nurses through this whole COVID pandemic, and I just feel like since the start of school, they have been working very, very hard to educate administrators, to educate teachers, to educate families, to educate students, and to work really hard with, getting in touch with families and just making sure people are safe. So I would like to, a little shout out to the nurses tonight for everything they're doing. They work tremendously hard.
Comment on the nurses too, they're also a key element of our contact tracing and have been supporting that effort since March. So we would be lost without them.
I don't want to leave anyone out, of course, the administration and teachers and principals and nurses, but I don't know if we've yet acknowledged the parents of the hybrid at-home days. These are parents who, in many cases, have had to adjust their work schedule, and they're teaching without training, without pay, and without representation by a union. So we have a lot of parents working very hard, some with multiple children at home, and I just want to acknowledge and take a minute to consider the amount of work that we're putting on parents during these hybrid at-home days and appreciate their work.
Parents of the remote students are working
And remote
hard
as well. Again, I don't want to leave anybody out.
All right. That brings us to public comment. We received one public comment today, and I think Ms. Kavanaugh, would you read the floor?
Sure. So we received a comment from Nicole Reichutz, who says, "Hello, Superintendent Kavanaugh, Hopkinton School Board Committee, and Hopkinton community members. My son is a first grade student this year, and we are in the hybrid learning model. We have a wonderful teacher, and my son is enjoying school on the days he is in the classroom. We are appreciative to have a hybrid model offered. However, it is not enough for our youngest learners. First grade is such a critical year for learning as well as socialization. On average, our hybrid learners are only in person for 8 days a month. This makes it incredibly difficult for establishing continuity of learning and impedes socialization. We have had a few positive cases in Marathon so far this year, and my son's class was recently impacted by a positive case as well. Global studies, as well as our own experiences in Hopkinton, have proven transmission rates in schools are incredibly low or non-existent. At this time, there's no scientific data which supports the decision to continue disadvantaging our children from receiving the education they deserve. Releasing the Hopkinton School District's full reopening plan, 5 days of in-person learning, as required, to parents and community members is long overdue, and this was promised to us before the start of school. We are now in November without any updates on this. Our children are the ones who are suffering. They deserve better. Please provide us with the full school reopening plan in alignment with the Commonwealth's guidance. Respectfully, Nicole Reichutz."
Okay, that brings us to liaison reports. Does anyone have, sorry, not liaison reports. That brings us to the superintendent's report, which we have a long one.
Queued up and ready to go. Yes, this will be a long superintendent's report tonight, and I think that there are just so many different issues out there that need to be covered. So bear with me as we kind of muddy our way through this.
Dr. Eagle, before you start, just process-wise, do you want to go through one topic and then field questions?
Sure. I think that would be fine.
Does that work?
All right, so maybe this ties directly to our public comment for tonight, because I feel like families are getting some mixed messages. They hear from the commissioner, they hear from the governor, and then they also hear from their local school districts. And if you listen to the commissioner and the governor, they would suggest that we are ready for the COVID-19 full-time reentry, just bring all of our students back full-time. And then sometimes when you listen to your superintendent, you're teetering on the brink of, is this the week that we're going to need to shut down our schools? So the messaging is really unclear, and I think that we need to have this kind of a conversation so that people understand kind of where we are with the virus, where we are with the potential for reopening, where we are with the potential for closing. So I have incorporated here some information, and at this point in time, the Hopkinton Public Schools is going to continue with our current learning plan, and these are pretty much the reasons why. You'll remember that way back on June 25th, we got guidance from the Department of Elementary and Secondary Education. And what they said to us at that time was, you could establish a plan that has 3 feet of social distancing, you can establish a plan that has 6 feet of social distancing. And when we did our reentry work, and we were a 36-member team, we really did opt for the 6 feet of social distancing at that time. And granted, some things have changed. Schools are not the super spreaders that we thought that they could be in the summertime, but we're not sure why that is. The CDC has not relaxed its guidance of 6 feet of social distancing, and it's hard for us to know. Are we not super spreaders because we're keeping our masks on and washing our hands and we're 6 feet apart all day? Or are we not super spreaders, just because, there's not that kind of transmission of the virus among young kids? We really don't know why that is. So while people will say, there's science to kind of back this up, there is some science, but I'm not sure that there's enough science to be able to say that if we brought back our kids and we had all of our kids eating lunch, say, and before there ever was a pandemic, that we had cafeteria space that was almost too small for our student bodies. Most schools have 3 waves of lunch. We have 4 across our schools in Hopkinton. Now, granted, we have about 25% of our kids not here, but that varies from school to school. So at the high school level, there might only be 9% of our kids who aren't coming in person. But at Elmwood, there could be closer to 35% of our kids who aren't coming to school. But either way, when we serve lunch, we would be putting our kids, I would say probably closer than 3 feet, and they would have their masks off and they would be eating lunch. So I'm just not in a place yet where I feel like the science is telling us that it's okay for kids to do that. So number one, we don't have medical evidence that suggests at this point that less than 6 feet of distance will truly be safe. Number two, we have the age-old school bus transportation concern. If we're going to bring our orange and green cohorts back in together, some of our buses may only have 8 kids on them, so it wouldn't be bad to double those up. Some of our buses right now are actually at, close to capacity, so we couldn't double those up. Can you think outside the box for busing? Certainly you could. The lunchrooms, I know I started with that, and I will say it once more, those are going to be very, very tricky to navigate. And I get, why are we in a state where we're allowing restaurants to stay open and gyms to stay open when we can't quite navigate those things in public education? But that's sort of where we are at this point in time. Number 4, when we negotiated a memorandum of agreement with the Hopkinton Teachers Association, that MOA contains safety protocols that we negotiated with them in very good faith. At the time, they were very concerned for their membership and for students as well, and the district was as well. We were concerned for teachers, we were concerned for administrators, we were concerned for students. And so if you were to do something where you were going to reduce that 6 feet to anything less, that MOA would need to be revisited. And then finally, the case count in Massachusetts does not seem to be on the decline, but rather on the rise. We've had several days above 2,000, which is pretty alarming. So let's move along to Thanksgiving, which is another concern for us. And this is why I say that at this point in time, we're really in no position to change what we're doing. So Governor Charlie Baker has a travel order in place, and at this point in time, the only states that are not considered to be higher risk states are Vermont, New Hampshire, Maine, and Hawaii. So if we have students and teachers and administrators and paraprofessionals and custodians, anyone who is traveling outside of Massachusetts for Thanksgiving, what needs to happen is that person would either need to have a negative PCR test at least 72 hours prior to their return, within 72 hours prior to their return to Massachusetts, or when they get back to Massachusetts, they can get a negative PCR test, or they can quarantine for 14 days upon their return. It's really hard to say what things are going to look like on that Monday morning after Thanksgiving. We have heard from the Commissioner of Education. He does something called On the Desktop. Today's, again, reminded people, you shouldn't be traveling. If you are going to be having a Thanksgiving dinner, you should be eating with the people who are still in your bubble. All of those things keep coming out. He has also said to us that if you do close your doors after Thanksgiving, it will likely trigger an audit from the Department of Elementary and Secondary Education. Today, there was sort of an impromptu survey of all of the Metro West-ish districts, and I think at this point, there's one district that has already agreed to close, but for a different reason, so they will be closed after Thanksgiving. But for right now, we all remain open. But certainly, we're not opening our doors to all of our students, but just to our green and orange cohorts as we typically would. And then the last piece before we move on is just I want to remind families that you do need to get your kids a flu vaccination on or before December 31st, 2020. I think that's been in place since August 19th. I know that there are folks who are saying, well, does that apply to the adults in your school community as well? And it does not. Our Human Resources Department did do a really nice job. They held a flu vaccine clinic this just recently, a few weeks ago. 65 administrators, faculty, and staff took advantage of it. If people are interested in knowing a little bit more about, who and why, you can visit the mass.gov public health website. And according to that website, the doctor who's in charge of infectious diseases is really encouraging this because flu shots, he says, will save lives. And so that's where we are. I think that this might be a good spot to pause and have conversation about reentry and flu shots and all of that.
Does anyone have any questions or comments about reentry? I'm sure the answer is yes.
I just had a comment to kind of confirm what you're saying about the difficulty of changing track right now in mid-November and putting all the kids back in school. I mean, the transition to the hybrid model alone was so traumatic for the community, for teachers, for students, that now we're in that groove, we're in that rhythm, let's stay with it. There's far too much change around us as it is, so just to support the decision.
One other thing that I didn't mention is, as people start to get even the sniffles, we know the 4 big criteria are wash your hands, wear your mask, socially distance, and stay home if you're unwell. So it's hard to know what attendance is going to look like for faculty and for staff and for students in the coming weeks.
Thank you. I went to the Mass Association of School Committees to see if there was any advice. And fortunately for everyone, the first advice I saw was be patient and understanding of your friends, neighbors, school administration, and community leaders. So within that context, I wanted to ask a couple of questions. I just want to make sure that we're doing everything we can and encourage the administration to really, really do everything we can to isolate what we think are the challenges and think creatively about overcoming them. And you mentioned that, could we figure out a bus thing that would work? Probably, maybe. And with lunch, people have said, well, why not just let half the kids go to the cafeteria and half stay in the classroom? Have we really thought through what can we do to open if we still have enough teachers and if the case count stays low? And as far as the MOA, because you mentioned that might also be a factor because we put 6 feet in there, a question I guess that maybe if we don't know, we could ask our attorney, but since it was rejected by the Hopkinton Teacher Association, what flexibility might we have to change that if we think it's in the best interest of our students. So those are some considerations I had. And then if we're going to have a more in-depth conversation on Thursday, perhaps, maybe I'd like to know what other school districts in Massachusetts are open full-time and how they did it. Yeah. And I certainly recognize the governor and secretary, they're trying to encourage it wherever feasible, right? And it's that feasible part that we're struggling with.
Yes, I know Carlisle is and I believe that they are in a K-8 school, those children as well. So that would be something to look at, to determine how it is that they're managing things like lunch and,
Yeah, I feel that we're in a rare community within Massachusetts that has a lower than average case count and metrics. And we've been doing everything we can to prevent the spread here. So I think those were the communities that Dr. Fauci and others have said, if you're in one of those districts, you really should be looking at how to open. That was a while back, but again, if the metrics in our staffing remain positive for us, then let's make sure we're doing everything we can to make that possible.
agreed.
So we did talk about, we're still planning the agenda for Thursday. We have the Fund 2 meetings this week, but we do have the opportunity to have a more robust follow-up conversation to answer some specific questions on Thursday, so we will
Okay.
put that.
Thank
I
you.
just a couple of things that strike me. I've been looking at our capacity study from last year, apropos of other projects and things, and one thing that I noticed is that I think every school was cited as having an undersized cafeteria. If you look down the list, I mean, not just by like 10 square feet, like by a significant amount in pretty much every school. So even in the best of circumstances, as you said, we do have a tight facility for eating in every school right now. And so trying to do that safely is challenging. The other thing I was going to note, it's just, I do know that we rely on things like open windows, outdoor space for some classes, and certainly mask breaks. And as we approach the winter with colder temperatures and, maybe less tolerance for that, for the outdoors and bad weather and whatnot, we have other challenges of even maintaining the safety protocols we have currently. So I'm personally a little bit leery of making a significant change because of where we are in the sort of cold and flu season, in the weather cycle, and watching case counts all over Massachusetts and the country go up so fast. But I do also have a curiosity about the younger grades versus middle school, high school. I think things get very complex at the high school. The hallways, under the best of circumstances, are incredibly crowded. Even if we can put kids in classrooms, I mean, at the upper grades with all the passing, it's hard for me to fathom how we could do that right now safely. I don't know if maybe there are some hurdles in the younger grades that we could address. So maybe that's another conversation, but I don't know. I support where you are right now. I think it's a difficult time, but worthy of more discussion if there's more to talk about on Thursday.
Couple things. One is, I would definitely support what you're saying. I also would have a lot of concern if we were looking to shift models prior to the date at which parents would be able to make another choice to switch, because I know that there are a lot of people who would have concerns in the community, as would our staff, just based on what we know and based on what the CDC is saying. If we had to put kids closer together than 6 feet, particularly with the cafeteria, I would also be concerned that if we were going to shift our eating situation at all, whether or not we would have enough supervision to have more areas available for eating, and just, figuring out all the logistics that we went through over the summer. I know that initially we had discussed having kids eat in the classroom, but that didn't pan out as a supervision issue, right?
Yes.
The other thing I had is a question, because I hear this a lot with regard to shutting down after Thanksgiving, and it triggering a DESI audit. What does that mean exactly? Like, what is a, I'm not in favor or opposed to shutting down, but when I hear them
That is the
threatening an audit.
mystery of all times, but I do think that they would question why you did it. Like, what was it that triggered that? And I think for me, it would really just be a lack of physical presence in the school. You know, if you can't bring in enough educators, or you can't bring in enough paraprofessionals, or you can't bring in, you know, enough administrators even, like, how are you going to actually run your schools?
That makes sense. I also am hearing little trickles here and there from my own little circle about substitute teachers and illness of different, and I know some of that is probably related to people having to quarantine, but are you seeing from a larger level an issue with classes not being able to be taught because of staff being ill or quarantined and not finding subs?
Typically, we have about 60 subs in our sub bank, and we are down to somewhere around 20 subs. I think today is a good example. I think Mr. Bishop told us that he had 13 staff members out today. And so that doesn't just mean teachers, you know, certainly it could be in paraprofessionals or, you know, just different people in the Hopkinton High School community. But if we're thinking that's just one building, and we're talking about 13 staff members, you know, so what ends up happening in the high school, for example, is, you know, we'll put all of the students into the athletic center, we'll put them all into the cafeteria, and they'll just sit in front of their laptop, and obviously, you know, they're Zooming with their teacher during that class period who can still teach from home. But we really don't want teachers coming to school if the teacher isn't feeling well, because if the teacher, you know, we hope that this isn't true, but has symptoms and could be or may not be COVID positive, but you don't want to take that risk and bring a potentially COVID positive person into your school environment. So that's what we do at the high school level, you know, whenever it's feasible. But, you know, at the elementary level, you're much better off, I think, having the kids' actual teacher teach them than to have a substitute in the classroom. So if a teacher feels like she's just going to be out for a single day to see, you know, how feeling under the weather does or doesn't pan out for the next day, a sub is fine. But if someone's going to be out for 5 days, it's almost better, I think, for that particular classroom to have remote instruction with the actual teacher than it would be to, you know, sort of have a substitute kind of running around the room trying to implement lesson plans that aren't her own, you know. Not that our subs don't do a great job, they do, but for 5 days in a row, you like to have your regular classroom teacher there.
So on Thursday, we can talk more about what other districts maybe have done that have opened up, and think about any other questions we may have to go over this more.
Great.
Thank you for sharing.
All right, so just a really quick conversation about student achievement in the pandemic, because I'm sure that people are wondering, like, how are we doing? Are we keeping up or are we not keeping up? I guess with K-1, it's probably not surprising that we're in a place where we typically are. So we gave the STAR Early Literacy Test to all of the kids in K-1. And if a student was a first grader who exceeded a score of 775, which means that that student has about 100 words that they can read, or at least 100 words that they can read, they were given the STAR reading test that the kids in grades 2 to 6 were also taking. 25 of our students, not 25%, but 25 actual student scores indicated a need for urgent intervention. But that's typically what we find every single year when we do those tests. So historically, what we've done is we've purchased Lexia licenses for about 10% of the students, which would be, you know, given the fact that we have 270 kindergarten students, for example, that would be about 27 kids. So it's working out, you know, just right, I think, in terms of, you know, where we are this year as compared with previous years. In grades 2 to 6, and, you know, really all of this data comes from our ELA specialist and, you know, some of our elementary school principals, but our reading scores are slightly behind where they've typically been in grades 2 to 6. But what's interesting is we're actually seeing pretty good comprehension, and that we think comes from the fact that last spring, when we did, all of that online learning, a lot of what happened in those Zoom sessions is that we had kids talking about text. So there's that sense that they're kind of engaging in that meaning-making thing. But what we're also seeing is that kids individually might not be doing that kind of practicing that gives them fluency or accuracy. So that's some of the data that we have. Fourth grade teachers are reporting that their kids are good with talking about text. Our students who scored in the urgent or needing intervention, they were BAS or some other kind of test, so that we get a sense of not just that they are in that place of, you need urgent intervention or you just need intervention, but why is that? So that gives us a more holistic picture of that child as a reader. Most of our students will be either BAS, Benchmark Assessment System, LLI, QRI, tested in late January and early February. So there'll be, something widespread across the board, so we really have a good sense. And then our grade 6 students also took the QRI test this fall. And I think if I had a message to give to families at this point, I would just say read with your kids, read anything, because all reading is practice. So just keep them reading. Even high interest at this point would be great, because it's going to turn them into those kind of lifelong readers. So just keep them reading. I don't have math data up there, and this is probably anecdotal at this point in time, and I can bring us some math data in the future, but what they're saying is that they feel like we're probably better situated with math and with reading at this point, which I thought was interesting, that it didn't dawn on me that we would be in that place. I would have thought the reverse, but. All right, and we can move into surveys if you're ready to do that.
Any questions on the student evaluations?
Oh, it's great to hear
Yeah.
that it's a little more stable than I might have expected.
All right, so we just did some widespread surveying. We surveyed the hybrid, the remote, and the everyday attending students in grades 8 to 12. We surveyed the hybrid, remote, and everyday attending students' parents. And we surveyed all of the HTA members, too. So I will scoot through some of these results. So our hybrid students, we had 310 students who were willing to participate in our survey. We'll start on the right-hand side. On a scale from 1 to 5, with 5 being exceptional and 1 being disappointing, how would you rate your in-person learning experiences? And you can see in that top one, we've got about 90% of our kids are saying that in-person learning is working out great for them. On a scale from 1 to 5, with 5 being exceptional, 1 being disappointing, how would you rate your at-home asynchronous learning? And you get, I guess, a less enthusiastic response there. 65% of our kids say, yeah, it's going okay. And so if we look at their anecdotal kind of feedback, what they're telling us is that they really like being back in school, and they find it a whole lot easier to learn in person. The asynchronous days, and those responses were kind of mixed. Some of our kids said, this is really hard for me because I sort of struggle to be motivated, I struggle to be organized, sometimes I get out of bed and I procrastinate, those kinds of responses. But other kids said, you know what, I love sleeping in the morning because it's asynchronous, I can work at my own pace, and this is really working out great for me. So it was kind of a 50-50 on that. Some of our kids reported that they are struggling with Schoology, which is our new learning management system. Some kids said that they wish they had more immediate access to their teachers, and kids did say that they missed that collaborative learning even on their in-school days. So, it used to be that we could sit and be elbow to elbow or work together in a lab and really be collaborative and cooperative, and some of that has been hindered. I thought the pie chart in the top left was interesting, so we asked students on their at-home days how many hours a day are they spending on their asynchronous work. And if you look at those 4 big pieces of the pie, I think that those are kind of interesting. So we had 20 20% of our kids say that they're doing between 2 and 3 hours. We had 25%, 3 and 4. We had 22-ish% between 4 and 5. And we had 22% say greater than 5. So you obviously have just a few kids, maybe like 10%-ish, who said that it's taking, 1 to 2 or even less than an hour to do their asynchronous work. It's really interesting to me because I think that that would mirror almost what would happen in a regular classroom. You start with like something where kids are going to engage in some work, maybe some kind of seat work or collaborative work, and some kids get through it really quickly, and other kids, are just sort of slow and methodical through that process. Some kids will struggle a little bit. So those 4 almost even pieces of pie didn't take me by surprise at all.
This is all grades, or remind me again which grades?
These are the hybrid students in grades 8 to 12 who were responding.
Okay.
Now we have the hybrid parents. We had 804 people respond. And I think that the parents of the upper right are just the elementary responses. They were resoundingly, I think, enthusiastic about the quality of their kids' in-person learning. And the secondary students' parents are, down in those bottom bar graphs. But either way, I think that they are pleased with what's happening on the in-person days. Our hybrid parents, when we asked them how many hours a day for the elementary do you or other adults at home help your children with remote learning? Interestingly, we had 19.3% said they less than an hour's time. 38.8% said between an hour and 2 hours. 23.3% said between 2 and 3 hours. 12.2% said between 3 and 4 hours. And then there was a small fraction, maybe about 10%-ish, that said somewhere between 4 and 5 or even greater than 5 hours they are working with their elementary students on at-home learning on those asynchronous days. So again, families' experiences are very, very different with their elementary kids. The secondary people, on your child's at-home days, how many hours a day is your child engaged in learning activities? So how much time are they spending all together? And I think that the secondary parents almost mirror perfectly what the secondary students were telling us, just in terms of, you've got almost equal pieces of the pie there. 16% between 1 and 2 hours, 20% between 2 and 3, 26% between 3 and 4, and 19% between 4 and 5. And then you've got a group of kids who are doing the work in less than an hour, but you've also got 12.5% who are using more than 4 hours' time to get that work done, which feels like an awful lot. More than 5 hours' time to get the work done.
On the in-person responses, I've heard so many comments about people enjoying the small class sizes. I think the in-person in a hybrid model, although it's only every other day, has provided such a low teacher-student ratio that I think some students, I've heard from parents of students in the secondary level who have really flourished with that kind of environment. So it's interesting what this pandemic has brought to us, both good and bad.
Yeah, I think you'll see that in some of the teachers' responses. I'm not sure I incorporated those, but I have heard from several teachers how well they like the very small class sizes because they really get to know students in ways that they didn't before. And I think even the building principals are saying that it might feel like kids are going to school every other day, but because you have so few kids in the classroom, you can do kind of amazing things with reading that, maybe you would have done only 1 day a week before, but now you have an opportunity to even get it done twice a week because of having those small class sizes. All right, so our hybrid parents have some perceived strength and some perceived weaknesses. They like the access to in-person learning and they're excellent teachers. They say that their kids are so happy to be back in school with peers. They like that their kids are connected to the teacher. They like the smaller class sizes. This is one of my favorite bullets. One parent said, "I'm so glad there's a trained teacher versus an impatient parent."
Exactly.
They appreciate that the asynchronous days are so well organized and self-paced. Students, they report a gaining independence over their work. Asynchronous days provide time to pursue areas of personal interest, which they like. Obviously, it lowers the risk of transmission and infection if kids are only in every other day. Teens get to get a little bit more sleep, and some of the parents like Schoology. Some of our kids and our parents would tell you we don't like Schoology, which will come into the second column. Perceived program weaknesses, there's a lack of physical closeness with teachers and peers. It's difficult to wear your mask all day, and sometimes it becomes difficult to hear your teacher if that teacher's wearing the mask all day. The inconsistent attendance is a problem, especially when we start to have to quarantine kids. And, it really has felt unfair to families if you're just a close contact and you can't come to school. There's concerns about time and how much material is being covered. The parents are worried about being cohorted or grouped in the same classroom all day. There's, limitations on your socialization, limitations on related arts classes. Some parents said there was not enough asynchronous work. Some parents said there were too much asynchronous work. So I'll tell you in a little bit how we're hoping to address that a little bit better. Schoology and just too little video instruction was a worry. Students are requiring a lot of parental monitoring, and I'm sure that there are parents at home who are like, have you logged on? Are you doing your work? A lot of that, and I'm sure that gets to be old pretty quickly, and now it's November. Parents will say that there's just not enough access to the teachers, and they are saying that there is inconsistency from classroom to classroom.
Kevin, on the cohorting and grouping, the negative with the socialization and the related arts, that's a very middle school change, right?
It is a very middle school change, yes. Yeah. There would have been a whole lot more mingling, I think, at the middle school level. And I know that doesn't work so well for kids because middle school age kids tend to be very social. But I will say that the middle school principal and assistant principals worked really hard to kind of figure out how to promote as much safety as they could in that building, given the difficulties of the schedule and all of that. Trying to maintain the world language that kids chose, trying to maintain math levels, all while you're trying to still keep kids in cohorts as best you can.
Ask a question just related to a bullet on there. The inconsistency classroom to classroom, and I know that's a perception. Is there any anecdotal data or data from within our schools of how the hybrid kids are, where they're at with the curriculum versus fully remote? Is there any comparison to show that they're comparable or that one is?
We have actually had those conversations, especially with the elementary ELA director and principals, because in professional learning communities, we've grouped the teachers who are remote teachers so that, they're kind of delivering the same kind of stuff and they have people to kind of latch on to, and what are you doing, what am I doing? But because, you're not losing time for things like, okay, now we're going to do hand washing, now we're going to have mask breaks, now, so there's a little bit of downtime, I think, in the remote kids' schedules that could be used to speed right ahead. And, we have refrained from doing that. We're keeping everybody in sort of that same place. So that was something that came up kind of early on, and I don't know, Jen, you can probably speak to it much better than I can.
No, I think you've really clarified. I think we're trying very hard to work with the same curriculum, the same general concepts, and to keep everybody, for the most part, on the same track.
All right, so these are the responses from the remote students. In grades 8 to 12, we had 105 students who responded. If we ask them to estimate how many total hours a day they're engaged in their actual online learning, so that means you are sitting in front of that laptop, kind of engaged with teachers or peers, you can see that 25.7% of our kids say that they are doing that for greater than 5 hours. That feels like a lot to me. Between 4 and 5 hours, 38.1%. 21% of our kids said between 3 and 4 hours, and then that sort of smaller group there, 12% is between 2 and 3, so that really small slice there is just between 1 and 2. So I'm wondering why there is that very small slice right there. It would seem to me that kids would have certainly more online time. If we take a look at how many hours a day kids are engaged in independent self-guided learning, so you might have been in a Zoom session with your teacher for 15 minutes and the teacher said, okay, I think you can, kind of get to work on this. Maybe you log back in later, maybe you don't. What we're seeing there is that 19% say that happens for between 1 and 2 hours. 27.6% say that happens between 2 and 3 hours. 22% say that happens between 3 and 4 hours, and almost 10% say that happens between 4 and 5 hours. And 21% of our kids say it's greater than 5 hours. So if we take a look at that 21% who say that they are doing independent work for greater than 5 hours, they must be spending a whole lot more than 6.5 hours a day doing work, I would think, because I would think that they are in Zoom sessions and spending a lot of time doing independent work.
Talk about, this is 8 to 12, right?
Correct.
Grades 8 to 12?
Yes.
So this is a lot of tech and VHS classes? Or is it like a mix, 50?
There are not as many tech and VHS classes as you might think that there were. Because of the way we were able to cohort kids, I don't think there are any tech or VHS in the middle school, correct?
No, I agree with you.
Right.
Okay.
Yeah, so it would only be high school kids who are doing the tech and VHS. And I think that those landed mostly in, those kinds of elective courses, or we have, I think, quite a few foreign language.
Just an observation on the data. It was surprising to me the upper chart had such a small, it had a small slice of red, less than an hour of actual online remote. Is that what it was? Wait, please.
Yeah, I don't think we have any less than an hour's, do we? But we certainly have between 1 and 2 hours.
Yeah.
That feels like too little.
Too little, right? Because what I'm hearing is that the remote students, fully remote students, are in often a very structured environment where they're actively in Zoom sessions. But there could be some variation. There could be some selection of those students who have a minimum amount of that structured time, and they could be the same ones that are saying they have a lot of independent time. So maybe there's a high level of variation.
Yeah, and I think if we do the math on those percentages, that little slice of the pie probably only comes out to about 3% of the kids. But why are 3%, which would really only be 3 or 4 maybe of those 105 kids who have said that, but why is that? That feels like much too low even for 3 kids to say.
Even if they have 5 hours of unstructured time on top of that? Yeah, okay, interesting, yeah.
Question on the comment about the asynchronous day. I think there were some high school classes where the remote instruction, the fully remote, was on every other day the way that the in-person is.
That is true. If you are a student who is fully remote at the high school level, who is part of a live streaming class, you've been assigned to either the green cohort or in some cases the orange cohort. And so, you're sitting at home and you live stream on the day that you're aligned with that cohort, but you would be doing the asynchronous work with your peers on the asynchronous day.
But there are not classes that are fully remote where they're doing synchronous learning on alternate days at the high school. It's just the live stream ones that are doing, okay.
I think it should just be the live stream ones, yeah.
Data.
Yes, so I will just zip through their feedback. They are grateful to be risk-free for the coronavirus. Remote students tended to offer positive comments about Schoology, but there were some negative comments as well, so they're on both sides of the fence with that as well. Some are really struggling with tech and VHS courses. Some tell us that they are just Zoom fatigued. A few kids find it harder to get one-to-one instruction, while most others will praise the program's access to teachers. Some live stream classes are going very well. Others, kids are reporting, are not going as well, and it appears that technology use is the variable there. So depending on, the maybe sort of teacher savvy with the technology, some of those classes go very well and some don't go as well. Some would love to have an asynchronous day. Some believe there's too much work, and some believe that classes should be more interactive in the remote setting.
I'm so glad you did these surveys. This is really interesting.
Yeah, it is
feedback,
interesting.
Yeah.
All right, our remote parents, when we asked how many hours a day do you or another adult help your elementary child, you can see that 50% is the big slice of that pie right there, and those parents are saying that really it's less than an hour for them, which I think it's nice for us to hear. About another quarter of that pie is between 1 and 2 hours a day. The remote parents are helping their elementary-aged kids. And then that other quarter of the pie there, goes up from 2 to 3 hours at almost 11% to, another batch where you can see that the parents are really spending a lot of time with their kids every day. But when we asked the remote parents, overall, is the amount of remote learning time manageable for your family? 95% of them responded saying yes. And those were elementary questions. So moving on to the right-hand side, how many total hours a day is your secondary student using a device for remote learning? So how often do those parents see their kids online, interacting with teachers or peers? 51% of them said greater than 5 hours, and almost 30% of them said between 4 and 5 hours, and then there are, much smaller pieces of the pie. The next one down obviously got the third greatest number of votes, so to speak, so between 3 and 4 hours. So it appears that our remote learners are spending a lot of time face-to-face online with teachers and peers. But we did also ask those parents what they thought about their secondary students engaging in independent remote learning activities. So they are actually engaged in learning, but they're not using their device or Zoom or some other teleconferencing kind of platform to do that. And we have parents, 16% said less than an hour. 33% said between an hour and 2 hours, 25-ish% said between 2 and 3 hours, 8% said between 3 and 4, 11% said between 4 and 5, and the remainder where it said greater than 5. And that looks like it's probably somewhere also around 8%, just given the visual.
Again, this side is for 8 to 12.
But
Grades
anybody
8 to
in
12.
secondary, so it would have
So
been
6 to
parents who
12.
have kids in the grades 6 to 12, yes.
It gets harder and harder for parents to know what's occurring on the device when they get older.
Yes, it does, yes. And so the remote parents, their perceived program strength said that the teachers are super engaged, that the teaching is high quality, that the teachers are well organized, and the programming is well organized. So they are very pleased, I think, with the quality of instruction. They are pleased that they are avoiding exposure to COVID. They like the very specific scheduling with ample breaks put into the day. They kind of like that their kids aren't riding around on buses all day, so that saved time. And the kids will tell you that's good because that's extra sleep I'm getting. The live streaming, the parents will tell us, is excellent, and they appreciate smaller class sizes. Some of the perceived weaknesses that the parents are telling us that Schoology can be hard to navigate and that the Chromebooks will just shut down on them. There's a lack of socialization, that the VHS and tech classes are weak, that it requires a lot of parent monitoring, that there might be too much time online, and the last one is that the live streaming has inconsistency in its quality. All right. Now we are on our everyday students, and only 4 of our everyday students responded. So if we asked them about the quality of instruction, 3 of the 4 said they would rate it as a 4, and 1 said that that person would rate it as a 5. And of our 4 responses for every day, even though you come to school every day, how much time do you spend on schoolwork outside of school? 2 of those kids said less than an hour. 1 of those kids said between an hour and 2 hours, and the 4th kid said between 2 and 3 hours. So those are kids who are coming to school every day. So, there's clearly some outside work going on for them. Our everyday students offered that feedback, that they really like being back in school and they find it easier to learn in person. And 1 respondent said that they are super happy that they get PE every day. And I think that there was actually more to that comment, something about, how good it is to be physically active and moving your body. So I really appreciated that comment. 1 respondent says that they finished their work early and they could use more work. Another respondent said that some of the information can be repetitive in the everyday model. 1 respondent said that they'd like to see their friends with consistency, so even though they're coming to school every day, they have some friends who come only every other day. 1 student said that they thought they might fail if they were not coming to school every day, and another said that the ongoing teacher support is helpful. And 1 student said that they would like to bring all students back full-time if the number of COVID cases go down. So I think it's a clear message that they miss their peers.
Are these 8 to 12?
8 to 12, yes. And our everyday parents, we had 72 parents respond, and you can see that for the most part, they seem to think that we're doing a pretty good job with the instruction. So 64% of them rated it 5, and then other than like just a little bit of a 1 over there, we have everybody else in the 3 and 4 category. And we asked them, even though your child or children come to school every single day, how much time on average does your child spend on schoolwork outside of school? And 83% of them said less than an hour. Almost 14 said between 1 and 2 hours, which kind of feels right, I think, in terms of homework. And our everyday parents, in terms of perceived strengths and weaknesses, they say their kids are happier and focused on learning. They love the smaller class sizes. Everyday learning helps immensely. Thank you. They appreciate how great their teachers are. They say that their kids are missing their peers on asynchronous day. They say there might be too much online or Chromebook work while kids are in school. The lack of identity with a cohort gets a little bit confusing, so when information goes out that says, and if you're a green cohort student or you're an orange cohort student and you're neither one of those 2 things, it can be a little bit baffling. The curriculum moves slowly. They feel like because they come every day, their kids are at an increased risk for COVID. The sudden remote days leave parents scrambling, and repetition can be good and repetition can be bad.
And
Which
are
makes
these parents of all ages?
Yes, any of the kids who come to school every single day, their parents could have responded to that.
So elementary and secondary?
Correct. Yep.
Do you know offhand how many students roughly we have coming every day, district-wide?
I don't know the answer to
okay.
that. I
It
can
just popped
certainly
into my
ask
head.
Linda Henderson that question. She would know. I think in the district, we have somewhere around 470-ish students who are on IEPs who are invited to come every day. I know that we have over 200 Ls now, but I'm not sure how many of them are WIDA levels 1 to 3. And then the socioeconomic disadvantaged students were also invited to attend every day. So there could be a good number, like, clearly into the hundreds. All right, and our educators. How many hours outside of school would you say you're spending each day on average developing lessons or adjusting service delivery? And so you can see that we have, let's see, we'll start with the people who said less than an hour, very, very, very slim percentage there, like maybe 1%. The teachers who are doing between an hour and 2 hours, 29%. Between 2 and 3 hours, almost 33%. Between 3 and 4 hours, 22%. And almost 10% are between 4 and 5, and then greater than 5 hours. You can see that number is probably about like 7%-ish. And we had 238 educators respond to
That's a
that.
great response rate for the educators.
It is, yeah, very good. The teachers' top 5 concerns, and these were the ones that I saw appearing over and over and over and over again. The teachers are struggling with Schoology, and I get why they are. It's a brand spanking new platform. We were very used to things like, using Google Classroom or Canvas or Turnitin, and this is all new in a time when it's really hard to be doing something new. They are struggling with creating the lessons for the asynchronous days, because a lot of that is, what would it look like if I weren't with the kids? How can I figure out something that they can do where they're growing as learners and growing in the curriculum area or growing as readers, but they don't have teacher guidance, and it's hard to create those kinds of lessons. It's tricky to engage learners who are either remote or working asynchronously. It's really hard in those days when we have had to transition on a dime from being hybrid and then saying, sorry, everyone's teaching remotely tomorrow. That's hard to do. And of course, that whole idea that, there's never enough time and there's not enough time for self-care and the work just never stops. And, you just feel like you're on that, overwhelming treadmill that you just keep running and running and running and running and never reach the end. That was very clear in the educators' responses.
With all of our scheduling efforts, do the teachers still have the same opportunities to get together in, across grades or subject matter? Or do we still have built in the same kind of planning?
We do still have PLCs and, those same kinds of, if you are, middle school, do you have team time? If you're at the high school, do you have, course partners and those things? We do still have that, yes. And what we have been encouraging teachers to do is really to kind of divvy up the work almost, so that takes a little bit of the stress off. But I'm not going to pretend that it takes the stress off. It helps to mitigate it, but I don't think that it alleviates it to the degree that you might want it to.
Yeah, I remember you saying, I think last spring at one of the elementary schools, there was a sort of a pocket of excellence of sort of divvying up the work. And it
Yes.
seems like a good model. I didn't know if it was even feasible with all the different permutations of the scheduling and everything.
No, it still is, yeah. All right, and so with live streaming, if you are a teacher who has been asked to live stream, what is the quality of the technology equipment that the district provided? And you can see that those numbers are kind of all over the place. 10% or 4 of them gave it a 5, 30% or 12 gave it a 4, 33% or 13 gave it a 3. And then about 10 teachers and 25%-ish told us that, they were a 1 or a 2.
And that looks to be the bulk of our live streaming teachers, yes, just based on...
Based on numbers, yes. Like on the 39 responses, yes.
Was there unstructured feedback with that too, or do we not know why some thought it was good and some thought bad?
No, there was some unstructured feedback. I didn't
Okay.
incorporate it, but I certainly could
Okay,
share
great,
that.
as long as you have it, yeah.
Do you know to what extent teachers have have accessed tech support for help in the classrooms?
We actually do have that. The tech integration specialists have sort of kept a record of, when did you get your equipment? My first outreach, what kind of support did you need? How's it going now? So they've been interacting with teachers to, kind of make sure that they feel comfortable using the technology. And I think too, depending on what the instructional needs are, you can, sometimes have a need in one classroom that might differ from a need in another classroom. We asked the teachers, if you are a teacher who has been asked to live stream, please rate the quality of the tech support the district provided to you when learning how to use the equipment. 5 teachers gave them a 5, or 13%. 29% gave them a 4, 24-ish% gave them a 3, and 10% 2, and 24% a 1. Last live streaming one. This one I thought was interesting because it's kind of bell curve-ish. If you're a teacher who has been asked to live stream, please rate the quality of the education that your in-person and remote students are getting. So 2.6% or only one person would have rated that a 5. 9 teachers or 24% would have said 4. 16 teachers or 42% would have said a 3. 7 teachers or 18.4% would say 2. And 5 teachers, 13.2% would have said 1.
What was the qualitative value of like a 1 and a 5? Like, was 3 about like average? Was it labeled as such?
No, I think we just labeled, the 2 ends as either, excellent or poor. All right, so from that survey, some of the, maybe 3 of the big issues that we'll be looking at. One is the asynchronous learning. And one thing that we would like to share with parents is that, sometimes if you're a parent, you believe that that kind of face-to-face instruction is what qualifies as time on learning. But I think that if we were not in the midst of a pandemic and a parent walked into an in-person classroom at any point of the day, just regular old ordinary instruction, like you might see kids who are learning dialogically through like that kind of sustained and robust conversation, or learning collaboratively by sharing ideas and ultimately making meaning and building something. You could have kids who are engaging in independent seat work that involves what teachers would call productive struggle. They could be viewing videos actually in class where a teacher is sitting at a desk viewing the video with kids, or reading a short passage, doing the kind of silent and sustained reading. Kids could be writing to learn, they could be completing assessments, and so all of those things are things that kids can be doing remotely, and it doesn't require the teacher to sort of like be there with kids, in terms of that face-to-face, the teacher is talking and the kids are talking back to the teacher. So it's just important, I think, to know that student-centered learning can look different, and it would look different if we were in regular, old, ordinary instructional times. That said, we don't want to be, kind of shirking our responsibilities in any way. We are asking for parent-guardian partnership, and I think based on what you saw with those surveys, parents are partnering with us pretty well. They are saying, look, I know that I have to help my kid 2 hours a day or 3 hours a day, and, as I think our recognition at the beginning, they know that it hasn't been easy to do this kind of work. We're going to continue to work on sort of Goldilocksing the asynchronous work, maybe through differentiation. So, what takes one kid 5 seconds to finish and another kid, 50 minutes to finish, maybe if we start to look at what does the asynchronous look like for particular groups of students, so that we can kind of make it a little flatter as opposed to, someone's doing hours of work while someone's only doing minutes. And then, just that whole idea that we really do need to make our asynchronous work accessible for all learners. So how do we ensure that kids know where to find things, how to navigate Schoology, how to read that passage, what to do after they've watched the video, and just really think about those kinds of things, because I think once we continue to iron out those wrinkles, we'll be in a little bit better place.
It's a lot of data.
Yeah.
It's a lot of data. Some of the other problems we're addressing, Schoology, and this is just, I think, so important. I get it, Schoology is new. It is a challenge for people to transition. The kids are telling us it's hard, the teachers are telling us it's hard, the administrators are telling us that the teachers are telling them that it's hard. It's hard. So a few things that have come about, our special education liaisons, and I'm really grateful to them, have said, maybe what we should do is take a look at what does a kid see? And where are the challenges in what a student is seeing, and then if we relay that back to the classroom teachers, we can start to work with them to modify what works and what doesn't work so well for some of our kids on IEPs or just some of our kids generally. We will be setting aside time for tech integration specialists to triage in real time with teachers. So, and they obviously have jobs to do and can't do that all the time, but maybe if we set aside a couple hours a week to say, if you are in trouble, this is a person you can call, and that person can be right there for you. Set up faculty meetings where teachers have submitted Schoology questions ahead of time so that we don't, get the question in real time and then we kind of fumble through, well, let me show you, I'll bring it up on the screen, because if we have the answers quickly, we can get through more of them. Use some of our more adept teachers as Schoology ambassadors. Arrange for Schoology summer work, and I know that's a long ways away. But the one thing that we are really asking parents and kids and administrators and teachers to do is just to say, this is far from perfect right now, but that's okay. Like, in the midst of this pandemic, doing all you're doing, we're just grateful that you're getting as far as you are getting every single day, and we know how hard it is.
Has there been training for parents in Schoology?
I
Sessions where parents
think
can
that
ask
there
questions?
might be online kinds of things that parents can watch, and Jen, you might know better than I do.
Yeah, I'm not aware that we run a parent Schoology training. I do think there are resources that have been shared out.
That has been shared already.
It's not fully open to parents at this time.
Correct. All right, and the last is live streaming. You know, again, certainly it's new, and admittedly, it is totally a challenge to transition from something where you had all your kids in front of you. You had, books and laptops, and you could pull up a chair and sit next to a kid, and now all of those things are turned upside down with live streaming. So to hopefully make the situation a little bit better, we can do a quick classroom check to see if all the technology is up and running and to make sure the teacher knows how to use it. Just one more check, go around with that. To approach our teachers who are live streaming and ask whatever your professional learning needs are. And I know that our tech integration people have been following up and saying, how's it going? Do you need anything? But sometimes I think if you actually go face-to-face in the classroom in the privacy of that setting and say, what can I help you with? Something else might surface. Have our tech integration specialists observe classrooms to make recommendations to their peers for streamlining the live streaming. So if they can go in and kind of watch and see how it's working in real time, sometimes you might say, hey, if you move the microphone over to here, I have a feeling the kids will be able to hear better, or maybe the headset's a good idea, whatever. And once again, I think we need to acknowledge that this is far from perfect, and that's okay. Given what we are hearing from families and from kids, I think that our students and our families genuinely appreciate the live streaming, much more so than if they were in a VHS or a tech class with a teacher who's remote and a teacher who is almost always asynchronous. Like, this is a gift to our kids, so we're appreciative of that. All right, and that's all I have from the surveys, which is a lot. So I'm sorry for how long it has taken me to go through that.
No, that's excellent work. I think it's excellent that you've done this checkpoint and you have concrete next steps, learnings that we've taken from this. I think this is all we can ask for in a pandemic is we've done what sounds like a really solid job of rolling out our learning plans, and we have some opportunities to maybe improve, but the feedback to me sounds generally fairly solid. It's good.
Yeah, it feels to me like what I would have kind of hoped and expected it would be at this point in time.
Joe?
I think it's really rich data. I want to compliment you on the way the questions were structured. It allowed you to get meaningful feedback in return, and also it gives you a lot to mine through as you look ahead, especially if you combine it with the performance data that you showed us up front tonight, right? That the students are performing maybe better than we might have expected given the change in the delivery model. So I think what the pandemic has forced on us is this model that's very flexible. There's many different learning models available, and different families and students have migrated to different ones. And I'm wondering if there ever is an after the pandemic kind of time that we might hold on to some of these learnings as a way to offer a more flexible learning model permanently, thereby, for example, seeing that maybe 10 to 20% of students want a certain percentage of their classes remote or online, and maybe that frees up expense and cost and building space for us in some cases. So I hope that that's how our administration is using that data in combination with the performance data.
Well, I do think when Jen ran the Modern Classroom course, and we've been having teachers work with Panopto to make new videos and Schoology, I do think that we have had to sort of fatten our repertoires a little bit, and so if there's one thing that I think we could say, well, there's another perk that kind of came out of this whole thing, it has been grueling hard to do that.
Yeah.
You know, and I don't want to make it sound like everybody woke up one day and voila. I mean, I think we're still really struggling with a lot of it, but I am grateful for the investment our teachers are making. They're working amazingly hard.
Absolutely.
Question, and I don't know if the data has enough to tease this out, but the teachers, there was a percentage of teachers that was larger than what I would have guessed that are working more than 4 hours a day outside of the classroom. That's a very long day for people who have other lives, I'm sure, and other responsibilities, families, whatnot. Is there any sense within the data of which particular modality that for example, is one, is remote causing people more work
Yeah.
outside the classroom day, hybrid, or what? And is there a way to offer help to those in particular to help alleviate some of that?
Yeah, and I think that would probably be best dealt with like at each individual building. Like I would love for the administrators, and in fact, we had a building principal meeting today at noontime, and one of the things that they talked about was sharing this data now with their, you know, their subject matter leaders or their CTLs or, you know, department, you know, people kind of at the middle school or whatever. And you know, as you kind of look at the data, what is it that are big takeaways and how can we help? I think you raise a good point. Why is it that a teacher who's working a 6.5-hour day is going home and working another 5? Like, that does not feel tenable for,
Exactly.
you know, a long period of time. Yeah. Which probably gets us to number 5, which was there, you know, how do I have that work-life balance? It's just, clearly that person does not have a work-life balance. All right, so as we launch into budget season, I just wanted to talk about 2 things that are big unknowns for us in personnel. Enrollment is our huge question mark for personnel. We have really, I mean, even if we're looking at where are the new developments and how many, you know, houses are going to be ready for occupancy, and you know, how many kids have left the district to go to a private school and will they come back, and all of those kinds of questions, it will be hard to tell where we are with that. And so if we are in need of additional personnel, like we could be struggling next August for personnel. And another issue that we have is that we're going to be negotiating 3 contracts, so, you know, with nurses, teachers, and paras, so it's hard to know how to budget for the salaries of those personnel. On the expense side, we are also kind of struggling to assess how much disposable PPE is going to be needed for next year. We have already started to look at if the burn rate would be the same as it is currently. Like, there's no shutdown this year, we stay open all year long. If you had to buy paper towels and hand sanitizer and, you know, nitrile gloves and all of that, PPE for nurses, all of that, we would be talking in excess of $150,000. And we have to remember that this year we had the Supportive CARES Act money to buy all of those materials. Next year we would not have that in place, or there's no indication right now that you'd have that. So just as we move into budget season, you know, those are the concerns that we probably need to be thinking most about. I did just include those old enrollment projections. If you kind of take a look at that grid, in 2009-10, we had a kindergarten class of 198 students, and as that class, progresses, it goes to 228, then 234, then 245, and 255, and continues to get bigger over time. So while this year we say, well, we only have 270 kids in kindergarten, and we thought we were going to have 275, you do have to wonder, what will it look like when the world kind of gets back to normal and people are buying, selling houses and transitioning jobs and coming back into the district because they're not homeschooling or whatever anymore. So I just thought that was interesting enrollment data, and we'll obviously be talking much more about that as we move through budget season. All right, I will very quickly tell you about our athletic season. Our cross-country teams, very nicely done. The boys went 5-0, the girls went 4-1. Nick Brown and Olivia Jones led the way for their respective teams. Golf went 10-0 on the season. We had a lot of different golfers contribute to the wins. Ryan Lundy was named MVP for our pod. Jeff Taco and Jeff Petruni were selected as all-stars, and golf right now is the only sport that has selected postseason awards at this point. Our soccer teams, strong seasons. The boys' team was really young and had only 2 seniors, but finished with a 2.44 record. They were unbeaten at home, and our girls' team also played very well, after losing 12 seniors from last year, and they finished with a record of 6-2-2. Both losses were 1-0 losses, and they only gave up 6 goals all year, which is nice. Field hockey, they used to be an 11-on-11 competition, and this year they had to play 7-on-7, which, probably rattled all field hockey players because it was just so unusual. They finished their season this past weekend, and that ended at 3-6-1. All of their games were very competitive. And lastly, our outdoor strength and conditioning program, which I know the school committee was gracious enough to fund, went really well and was well received by parents and students.
Dr. Kavanaugh, this reminds me that it would be so nice to have a student council rep come to our meetings. I really miss the students. I miss hearing about them. I don't know if there's any way we can't offer them snacks. We're kind of limited, but if there's any way to get, a student council rep, they would be willing to come just to pop in and give us an update.
Yeah.
I do miss hearing from them directly about their lives.
It was so nice when we had them. All right, and lastly, I know last time we were together, we talked about, let's just do snow days remotely, but after talking about that, we received an awful lot of feedback about it. There were several parents who said, you know what, I think that doing a remote snow day, our kids have so little time in school already, and if you do that, you're taking away the loveliness of that respite that a snow day affords us. And we heard from teachers that, when you call a snow day, if they have their own children at home, it might be hard for everybody to kind of navigate that on the spur of the moment and deliver remote instruction, which is, obviously the curveball thrown in. And a lot of people said, why do we rush the school year? More time that kids have in-person learning, the better off we are. So at this point in time, we are going with snow days will be snow days. They'll just be called as usual. If we get to a place where we're thinking, oh my gosh, we've already had 3 snow days, this is going to turn out to be disastrous, we may want to approach the association and say, can we sit down at the table and negotiate remote snow days? But I think that just keeping snow days as they are for right now and just kind of calling them and just see where the winter goes.
The entire senior class.
Thanks, me. And I think about 90 minutes is all I have for you tonight. Sorry.
Any
that
last
took so
questions
long.
on the superintendent report?
Wow, thank you.
Oh, my gosh.
Thank you very much.
That's a lot, thank you.
Okay, so moving on, the chair report is super brief tonight. You don't even have to put the slides up. Let me just,
Oh, I've got them already.
it's super, super brief. We had one email asking us to talk about the topic of the evening, possibly going back to fully in-person instruction. And then community events, we had a number of us attended the Massachusetts Celebrates Diwali webinar, which was Friday night. It was fabulous, and I have to give a shout out to our good friend Meena Brav, who was spearheading the effort, along with many other volunteers from Hopkinton, from Ashland, and many other Metro West communities. It was great. It was my first Diwali event, and I learned so much. I learned about fabrics and food and just so many facets of the celebration and the whole meaning of light triumphing over darkness, and it's great. It was a great event, very well attended. I don't know if anyone had any other comments.
Great.
It was all good. And then budgets, you talked a bit about budget season kicking off. We do have a schedule now for the Budget Advisory Group, which will meet monthly. Our first meeting is this Thursday at 4:30. And we're going to thank our town counterparts for getting that on the schedule. And as we'll see at the end of the agenda, I have signed several expense warrants and a payroll warrant. And that's it. Super quick. Liaison reports. Does anyone have a liaison report for tonight?
I do very quickly.
Great.
The Youth Commission met last week. The Martin Luther King Day, which is sort of one of their flagship events this year, is going to be entirely virtual. They're working to figure out what it's going to look like. They're not looking to do like just Zoom speakers. They're looking to see if they can find something more interactive. So more to come on that. Also, they're continuing with their gift card program. There's been a large spike in need in the community, while we've also seen a lot of nonprofits having less contributions given to them. So they're hoping to fill that need with gift cards that people can donate to them to be able to disperse to community members in need at different points. So we'll meet again on next week with them, so I'll have more after Thanksgiving.
Anyone else? Okay. Office hours, we had scheduled office hours for this Wednesday. We had internally discussed it for this Wednesday. I'm going to recommend that we push that to the beginning of December because we have now 3 nights of meetings this week. And I think there's a lot going on, a lot of chance for public comment, and a lot of chance for people to see us. So if there's no objection. Okay.
Good idea.
Okay. New business. Dr. Kavanaugh, we have music instrument donation.
Yes, very quickly. Mr. Hay is looking for your acceptance of a Yamaha bell kit, which was donated to the music department by the Alfano Chuss family. And so all we need for you to do is to approve that, and if you do, we will be able to use it with our music students.
I make a motion to accept it.
Motion by Meg.
Second?
Second. Is there any discussion? Okay.
I love that we're getting all these donations for
I
the
know.
music program.
Motion by Meg, second by Joe. All in favor?
Aye.
Yes.
Aye.
Aye.
It's unanimous, and it passes. Thank you very much, and thank you to the families who are donating. And that brings us, Ms. Rothermick, to the capital plan for fiscal year '22.
Off and you can jump on.
Okay, thank you. So once again, we will go through the capital plan for next year. Allows me to advance the slides. Well, maybe not.
Slideshow.
All right, it appears my computer is frozen.
Something up there moving. There.
Okay, there we go. And we're back.
Well done.
Just as a quick rundown again, HVAC district-wide, $350,000. Boiler replacement, this would be at the middle school for $201,000. Roof replacement for $3 million, that is for Hopkins and the middle school. Vehicle would be an addition for $59,500. System-wide security upgrades of $200,000. System-wide technology upgrades of $75,000. The district planning study for $80,000. White House exterior for $206,000. The wetlands order of conditions for $60,000, and additional classrooms at the Marathon School for $3,625,000. The HVAC district-wide represents the continuation of the process of installing control systems for the middle school HVAC. The boiler replacement is a replacement of 2 boilers with 3, following a recommendation through a design and engineering study that was done. The roof replacements, these are partial roof replacements at both the Hopkins School and the middle school. And again, these areas are active leaks within our roof systems. So at the Hopkins School, the areas to be replaced would be in green, and the area in purple would be repaired. The area in blue, that roof was replaced in 2016. At the middle school, again, the roof areas to be replaced are in green. In the top part, the roof replaced in this small section was done in 2019, and that was a result of storm damage, and that was covered by insurance. The other areas in blue, again, are not within the scope of this roof replacement. A vehicle for the building and grounds. Currently, there are 3 vehicles for 8 staff. This basically will increase their fleet to be more efficient with the number of staff we have in the need to transport and do their jobs. System-wide security upgrades. This represents the final year of camera installations throughout the district, and this recommendation was outlined in the Security Task Force Technology Assessment Plan that was done. The system-wide technology upgrades represents a data center firewall and software and the Bell system. The data center firewall keeps the network safe, and the Bell system is what controls the bells throughout the schools. The district planning study is to utilize enrollment projections, MSBA space guidelines, grade configurations, and discussion groups to determine a long-term strategy for enrollment growth in all our physical plants. The White House exterior renovation, this would go after both the roof, the siding, and the windows. Now, this number is subject to change. We actually are going after changing the windows now using some of the CARES funding. As we've talked about air movement and airflow, currently we're addressing that with keeping the doors open in that building. But as we're getting into colder weather, and of course with security, it makes more sense, and it is an allowable expenditure under the CARES to replace those windows and make that more functioning. So this number will come down. I don't have an exact figure for that at this time. The wetlands order of conditions, this is a continuation of a open order of conditions from when the original high school fields were built. The full cost is $100,000. There was an appropriation of $40,000 done in 2019. So this additional $60,000 will get to the $100,000 that is needed to close this order of conditions. And lastly, the Marathon School addition. This is a request to add 4 classrooms to the Marathon School. Marathon School has already repurposed several classrooms, which was the result of the additional first grade classroom last year and preschool classroom last year. So this construction would add 4 classrooms at the end of the wing, 2 on each floor with a stair tower. And there's additional need to take more rooms next year in FY22. This is just a couple of pictures of the tight space and how creative all the teachers and the school is being with how to address student needs in whatever pocket they can find. And when the school was built, there were 2 areas that were identified as potential areas for additional classrooms. This area over here is where there is the 4 classroom addition could be built, and this area over here is where 2 more classrooms could be built. And for orientation, this back field is back towards the playground area. So again, this just shows the zone of the 4 classrooms, 2 over 2, and a stair tower, be at the end of the hallway. And that would give us 2 additional, that keeps popping up on the bottom there. To date, just as a reminder, we have added 4 classrooms at the Elmwood School and 4 classrooms at Hopkins School. Each of those are 3,600 square feet. At the high school, we are in the process of adding 6 classrooms, 7,700 square feet, which does also include storage. This request would add 4 classrooms to the Marathon School at 4,300 square feet. And the reason these are a little bit bigger than both Elmwood and Hopkins is your kindergarten classrooms include a toilet area. And just to reiterate where we are in terms of enrollment, what Dr. Kavanaugh just touched on as well, just another snapshot of that. And any questions?
Who would like to start? Any questions? Joe?
Yeah, I have I've got a couple questions on the marathon expansion. One, with the current repurposing of the space, as the available space into classroom space, what teacher-student ratio, do we know what the teacher-student ratio is currently that we've been able to maintain by using that flex space? Have we basically been able to maintain the desired 18 to 22, or are we beyond that even by using the flex space?
Oh, I can take a really quick look for you.
And then other question was follow-up from when we reviewed this before was, have we been able to check, given that the Marathon School is technically still an open MSBA-funded project, and town meeting had appropriated funds for that project, have we been able to clarify with town CFO and council whether any prior appropriations for Marathon School, because we were under the amount appropriated by about 4 million.
The town treasurer is looking into that question.
Okay.
As to exactly the wording of that debt authorization. So I don't have the answer to that, and they are working on that.
Right. And then as the chair of the elementary school building committee for Marathon, again, it's not a closed project yet.
That's correct.
I would like some guidance from council and you on engaging back with MSBA, even if it's just to keep them aware of our enrollment situation, because you recall what an uphill battle it was to even get them to participate with us at the allocated enrollment projections that we ended up building to.
Yes, absolutely. As you know, they're in the process of considering the Elmwood SOI, and one of the things that they ask is for us to give them any new information which would be part of their consideration. And then this would certainly be new information for them to know as they're looking at the Elmwood SOI.
Okay, great, thank you.
Are there other questions?
I don't need it right now, but it would be a point of interest, I think, at some point.
Yeah, I think if we looked at the average, it's about 20.7.
Yeah. And just a reminder, I mean, we built some of those rooms because they're great to have, those meeting spaces and family spaces, and art room, and et cetera, and health room, but also knowing that during temporary enrollment peaks, maybe we could use those rooms temporarily for a few years until we can determine whether it is just a blip or a peak, or if it's going to be a sustained enrollment at those levels. And that's the part I think we're all struggling with. Where are we? It's hard to predict right now.
Right. I mean, we are still waiting on the enrollment projections.
Which will be even more difficult this year with the number of families that are either opting out or remote or private school and not knowing whether they'll come back or when.
Right.
Okay, thank you.
can we stay on the marathon project since you started there? Does anyone else have questions about the marathon project?
So, I'm going to try to articulate this all together, but so now my recollection from years past when we have passed our capital budget is that, and I know this is true, is that in order to advance it to the next stage of through the town to get through appropriations and make it to town meeting, we have to approve this to it at this point. Is there, I'm a little bit uneasy with the project at this point because it hasn't had the opportunity to be socialized with the town, basically. And I would be less uneasy with it if we knew more about the town's financial situation for next year than we do. And also kind of where we're going with the capacity study. But I know a couple of years ago when we authorized the turf field, we did authorize at this point in the process to move it forward just to get to that point, but with the expectation that we might need to take a second look at it down the road further in the process. Is that something that would be a possibility, given that there are some unknowns with, for example, the money that Joe's talking about with Marathon, given that, things are, hopefully we're going to know more in a couple months than we do right now?
Yeah, absolutely. So in order for for anything to move forward, the committee would have to approve it at this point.
Right.
Up until town meeting, the committee could also pull any one of its projects. So in terms of understanding the debt question, you would still go through the planning board, conservation, you would still go through all those permitting and review processes, even if the answer to the debt question is your original debt authorization at town meeting for the marathon school was X, and it came in at Y, so you still have that gap in order to do this project. So in other words, that debt authorization still exists. But you still would be going through all of the boards, so every board would be socializing and discussing everything along the way. So, in terms of what does that mean for the levy limit, this would be excluded debt. So it is not something that would be within the levy limit, whether it's part of that original debt authorization or not. So it would have to be voted both at town meeting and at the election. So it's 2 votes as well.
Thank you. I am very appreciative of the need for the space, so that makes me comfortable knowing that there is a kind of an emergency lever for us down the road if we feel like things are not looking like this is the right time for it this year. But I also wouldn't want to cut us out for potentially really needing this to start sooner rather than later.
Right. I mean, this puts you in the process. It now goes to the town manager, and then it will go through CIC, and it just is the very beginning of the process. But the committee would need to approve it in order to move it forward for the community even to have a say.
We lose our chance if we don't advance it forward.
Correct. I mean, you could do that last minute, what we did with the high school, but that's not a favorable approach.
On the other hand, though, we will see that capital improvements and everyone else will look back to us and say, well, what did the school committee think? So there's a little bit of, we have to take our responsibility seriously on whether we really think this is a sustained enrollment at a new level that's going to be sustained over the next 10 years. I don't know if I am not comfortable with the projection data from last year, applying that forward, given all the changes we've had in the past year. And if we're already using flex space and we have room for more flex space next year, I know we're eating into space that would ideally be used for programming instead of classrooms. But if that is available for temporary use to get us through until we are at a place where we can better predict enrollments, I don't know if this is the right year to be going to town meeting or voters asking for more money with that kind of uncertainty. I don't, say I'm against it, I just am saying I don't know.
Susan, could you explain, if we have these 4 additional classrooms, will that allow the other spaces to be reused for their original purpose, or will we need these in addition to still reclaiming some of the spaces? What is our expectation right now?
So that would give back the art room, that would give back the health room, that would give back that PLC room, and it would save the family resource room from also being lost, which is the plan for next year.
And we have enough room for like English language education, other programming like that?
So really, you can see in some of those pictures, the question I think surfaced last time, are those a result, the pictures, do, people in the hallway teaching, does that come about because of COVID, or does that come about because of real need? And, I think Jen and I can speak to the fact that when you go to Marathon, there are places now where you have, say, for example, a math tutor out in the hallway with 3 children, and that's not COVID related. We really have no place for those students to be taught by that particular person. The other thing I think that we're seeing is the number of L students, especially at that grade level, is, sort of skyrocketing. We have an awful lot of kids at Marathon who need L services, and, you do feel, like those are kids who should not be out learning in hallways if they don't have to be. So when we took the PLC room, we turned that into an L space. But there are other, of those small spaces in that building where we have put English language learners and teachers that were originally going to be, this is a book room, or, this is where the ELA coordinator resides. And you see them all the time, so you probably can speak more clearly to who's out in the hallway.
Well, for sure, and I think to your point, there's a little bit of that due to some of the constraints that we have this year, but overall, I think from way back when we talked about replacing center school, and we talked about how do we value the different curricular areas, and we're not demonstrating the way that we should be valuing art instruction and music instruction and health instruction by having those people, kind of run around the building on a cart. We're minimizing the educational opportunities by doing it the way that we are. And I think to Carol's point, we don't want to see our most at-risk and vulnerable learners learning in situations that aren't appropriate for them.
Yeah, I would say immediately 3 of those 4 classrooms, we would certainly have, grade level classes that could go into them, Ks or 1s.
So one of the things that concerns me is, again, like all of us, trying to understand enrollment data. So I know that if we were to approve this, if this were to make it through us and through town meeting, we would put these in place, not for next year, but probably the following year. Is that correct?
That's correct.
So we're looking, like when I look at the projections from Dr. Wagman, again, those are projections. I think the general assumption would be the years closest to the year the projections were done were probably more accurate than the ones that are 10 years out. So I kind of look at the ones down the line as a little bit, there's a larger margin of error. But, he wasn't even with this year that far off, 270 versus 275 for kindergartners. That's pretty close. So when I look at the projections, one of the notable things, to your point, is that this year, I think the original projection was 659, a population of 659. We have 622, I think. And then for the next 3 years, the projections are that actually those numbers go down. Now, again, they're just projections. We don't really know. And if kids were held back and didn't start kindergarten, and maybe there were not just 5 of them, to match the estimate, maybe there were 30 of them, we don't really know. That's going to change numbers for next year. But still, the numbers trend down, and then they peak in 2025, 2026. So that perspective, I kind of take that, because he did factor into his model, I remember, the number of units of housing coming online and whether they were 2 bedrooms or 3 bedrooms. And this was all in his report and factored in. And based on what is happening with units like at Legacy Farms this year, they seem to match up with his assumptions of where we'd be. I kind of checked back our actuals versus his report. So it's sort of a long way around to say that, I'm wondering if I know we need the space, but I'm wondering if there's any way to get through until such a time as we might repurpose the Elmwood modulars or the Hopkins modulars. Because as we look at this $80,000 project that we are probably going to vote for, that project should, I think, produce for the community a projection of spending of all of our facilities over the coming 10 years or so. I mean, if you look at the needs, Hopkins is in trouble, Elmwood's in trouble, the middle school and high school get to be in trouble later in the projections. And, I don't know, I'm just wondering if there's a way to, we can't help next year anyway. Like, what if we leased modulars? Like, I don't remember what those numbers were. I know we talked about lease versus buy last year. I mean, if we have a real crunch, if we were to lease modulars with the idea that we would put our own modulars in there, when they're available, I have no idea what the cost is on that. I know we talked about that before. Is there any way to address the immediate need? Because otherwise, I feel like if we don't address it this year or next year, we probably are going to be able to get by fine for a little while.
I mean, I will say, I can look into the cost again. The least numbers I have are old at this point.
Yeah.
That you would not be able to reuse probably the Elmwood or Hopkins modulars until you did some type of a substantial project. So if you were to be invited into the MSBA, for instance, for the Elmwood SOI, whatever that looks like at the end of the day, you're at least 5 years away. So you would have to complete that project of 5 years and then procure the moving of the modulars. So at a minimum, you're 5 years before you would move a modular if that's part of the plan.
How long would it take, is the projection that it would take to put the addition on Marathon? I'm in my head thinking the addition here at the high school was a pretty fast turnaround. I know with bigger projects, like, it seems to be about 5 years when we're involving the MSBA. But given that we don't expect MSBA reimbursement on this, what would the actual likely timeline be from when it's approved at a May town meeting until it would be completed?
So from approval at May town meeting, it would probably be 18 to 20 months.
I remember we approved those mid-year at that special town
Yes,
meeting. So
yes.
it was great because it accelerated and got the modulars in and everything.
Yeah, the timing of the high school project was off, so it will fall in basically in that 18 to 20 months.
I mean, I find myself sort of where, Joe, where you're saying, where I know that there's a whole pipeline of boards that will assess this, our recommendation, but it starts with us, so I think a lot of people in the community look to us and we haven't had ourselves a lot of time to really chew on this. So I want to make sure that we're recommending what we believe in. It's unusual for us to pull something significant, down the line after it's gone through the vetting, so. And I know there's a need. I don't question the need at all. I just question its timing vis-à-vis the $80,000 study that will put this in perspective of all the spending that I think the town needs to do. So that's my biggest question is timing and planning and urgency.
Yeah, I mean, a number of us have been directly in front of town meeting and procured tens of millions of dollars. And given that we're doing this bigger study of buildings and where things go, in the uncertainty around the enrollment data and the fact that I just asked earlier, maybe we can look at whether there's always going to be a portion of the population who's happy with remote, for example. Are there pressures we can take off space demands due to things like that? Hopefully the student performance data continues to be at the level we just got recently, but what if it drops due to the hybrid model over time? and more people opt out of public schools, I think there's so many likely variables in the data that it makes me very skeptical of any enrollment projections that are put before me right now. And I think it would be difficult for town meeting if it ever made it to that point, which then makes it not a winning proposition for us. We like to bring things to town meeting that we know are going to pass, and this to me would look very controversial, given the state of data, given the fact that we have, using the flex space temporarily for now, achieving close to target teacher-student ratio. Those are things going through my head. Plus, we have 4 here, so what if 2 of us vote yes and 2 vote no?
I cannot really see the school population decreasing in Hopkinton. I think once that vaccine comes around in the spring, people will flock back to the schools in even greater number, particularly the younger students who might have been held back a year by their parents. So, I mean, sadly, you know, I've told my children otherwise, but I can't really predict the future. But I suppose that we will have a large enrollment next year. Things will be returned to the rhythm. I think it's a great idea to expand the marathon. I'm so tired of having the art room taken away from the students. I'm so tired of having health pushed out in the hallway or moved to a cart. I know that we're supposed to tighten our budget, but when you're taking these essential parts of the curriculum away from the students, and I mean, you really are taking them away when you put them on a cart, because you're showing you don't value them as much. So I'm not sure, I don't feel any hesitation at all, actually, about approving the expansion for the marathon. I think that student population is going to go up, and we need the space for the kids. I don't think people are very attracted to the remote option.
Another question on the expansion as designed. I know the projections, again, projections are projections, but the DRA study suggested that we would be short 6 classrooms when we get to maximum build-out of our population around 2026-ish for the marathon. So we'd be adding 4 classrooms. I know we're abutting, I think you said playground. Like, is there an opportunity? Like, if we're going to do it, is it 4 that we need? Is it, you know, we'll be halfway to our peak if projections are anywhere near accurate or whatever. I just wonder if 4 is the right number.
Well, as I said in that one slide, they identified 6 potential classrooms that you could do. The 4 would be addressing the students that are there now, the 4 issues that we know of now, which is the health room, the art room, the PLC room, and next year, another space. So we know there's 4 areas that we've taken away and are using differently than was designed. And to your point, in terms of projections, if we never quite get to where we need the 6 classrooms, we've done the 4. So it's a piece of where we're going, but it's also based on what we know now, which is the students that are here before us.
And in truth, do we expect this $80,000 study to really be full of surprises?
For me, I mean, I don't know. We haven't actually detailed what we think the deliverables of the study are, but I mean, I'm looking at lots of pinch points across all facilities hitting at different points in the, you know, as the population grows. And I'm hoping the study will produce sort of a phased approach for how we address the campus needs in the district, so that people know that, you know, maybe we do Hopkins and Elmwood first, maybe we do the high school or middle school first, like, who knows? But we know. The community has asked us a lot to do planning. They've asked us to plan. They don't want us to be reactive if we can avoid it. And I think that's, in my mind, what that study is doing. So, you know, $3.5 million is probably fairly small compared to what's facing us with an Elmwood replacement potentially, or a Hopkins, Elmwood, new school, or whatever. But it's part of a picture. So that, for me anyway, I don't know, is that not how you see the study? Is that what you're?
No, I guess I don't see the study as being, something that doesn't take a look at all of our buildings. I think last time when we talked about Marathon, we did say it's really an early elementary learning center, right? So if that's the nature of that building, I can't imagine that our plan would be to reconfigure it from a pre-K K1 school. That's, technically the way it was built, designed around that population of student. I think the only concern that I have really is, we keep talking about flex space, and so let's imagine we take the Family Resource Center and, we're able to use that space, or eventually you take the library and you're able to use that space. Like, those, I think, are the last two spaces that you can take. But even if today we have 21 kids in a classroom and you expand and take the Family Resource Center and you add a grade level at grade 1, say, for example, you're only going down to 19 students. And that's with not a single additional student entering that school. So my only worry would be that once you've maximized and you've used those two spaces, you may or you may not climb up to class sizes that people would find untenable, but you'd have to say, as we did at Center School, I'm sorry, there's 24 kids in your child's first grade classroom, but there is no additional space anywhere. So that's my only actual worry, not so much about the space, but about the class size.
Do you mind if I add in one more thing about Marathon School? So the other kind of unintended consequence that I do foresee happening at Marathon is a complete and utter lack of any place for teachers to actually sit together, work together, and collaborate. So right now, they hold their faculty meetings in that Family Resource Center, and they are packed in there like sardines, and it's already kind of less than appropriate. And the library in that building isn't the size really like the Hopkins is, where you can gather your whole faculty. And the cafeteria, for very good reasons, is unavailable because they're hosting 4 lunches during the school day, and we're hosting a childcare center after school hours. And when I think about the amount of work that has gone into developing curriculum and keeping our teachers on the same page so we have instructional continuity, if you have art in a general ed classroom, at the same time you have health in a first grade classroom, our teachers have no place to meet. The teachers will be meeting in the hallways to plan the curriculum for the children, and that's going to be challenging. They're just maxed out.
Yeah, so to reiterate, we don't want that to be a permanent situation.
Right.
But like the MSBA, we don't want to have schools that are more capacity than we need to overbuild, right? And right now, I just don't know. I hope that Meg's right and everything works out next year, but we could be in for a second year of hybrid education, and we could see up to 100 more families opt out of public schools in that case, especially if private schools are in full-time. So I don't want this to be a permanent situation, but I don't know whether we have, I've said it before.
When is kindergarten enrollment? It's like April?
Yeah, usually, we actually moves it up to
January.
March, right?
It's
When
right
we do
after the new
spring
year,
is-
into
yeah.
January, February, yeah.
So, I
So-
mean, to Nancy's point, I mean, one option that we have
Yeah.
is that we can vote to keep it in the pipeline tonight, knowing that it will undergo further vetting. It's not that we all kind of agree there's a need. No one's saying there's not a need. It's just a matter of timing and funding and good use of the taxpayer dollars. So if we vote it tonight, and I say this, I don't know how we put it in the wording of the vote, or maybe it doesn't matter, but I want to plan to definitely come back and revisit it before town meeting, to give the school committee an option with further information, with known enrollments, with maybe having this $4 million overage, or whatever it
Yeah,
was,
don't even
from the
know that
first
yet,
build,
right.
figured out? Is that something that we could potentially tap into because the project is still open, which would make the timing very important because the project is still open, right?
Yeah.
So can we?
It is now, but it might not, we're scheduled to close soon, so I really would have hoped by tonight we would have had an answer from Town Hall on whether the existing appropriations can be used. But since we don't, I would not be against kind of moving it ahead and monitoring it closely and collaborating with the downstream boards to let them know.
That we're looking at certain
Yeah.
data. So would we then revisit it before we vote the final whole budget? Like we have that, when the budget's sort of all packaged together?
So this is separate than the operating budget. This now moves forward into, like I said, the CIC, and they'll have their hearings as well. The operating budget is completely separate.
So it would be us at a school committee meeting in April, or somewhere around the end of April, taking an action item to vote to endorse or not endorse the capital plan. Like, we may choose at that point to endorse it, but not this project, where our recommendation could be to hold on this project at that time.
I mean, I would advise that it is earlier than that, because by April, they will have had it part of the packet for town meeting. And that's
Earlier
what
than-
they're trying to avoid, is making last-minute changes to that town meeting packet.
Well, that's what I was wondering. Is it actually a change, or is this one of those cases where we go up to the microphone and we say, school committee took a vote to endorse this minus,
Recommends no action on
recommends no action on the marathon project?
You could approach it that way.
And the other question is, if it's earlier, would it, to make the packet in the way that we actually intend it, how early, and would that be after enrollments? Could we time it so that it's after we have a read on kindergarten and first grade enrollment for next year, but before the packet is finalized?
I think it's difficult to say that you'll have any kind of accurate read on kindergarten enrollment, because even if we say we're we're opening enrollment in January, you'll have folks who on July 15th say, well, I should get my kindergarten student enrolled now. Like, there's no urgency on the part of people until it gets to be closer to the start of the school year. Then they say, oh, yep, got to get my kindergartner enrolled. Not all people, obviously.
By then, we would know whether the existing appropriations cover it, though. So
Yes.
that's the other factor. That would force us to pull it.
I would think we'd also, I mean, there is a lot of data that could come between now and then. We would be able, even if we don't know with the kindergarten enrollment, I would expect we would have some sense of some of these other moving pieces that we don't know right now. And that at least buys us a little bit of time. Am I right, the warrant closes in February at some time?
I'd have to look at that calendar.
Okay, but there would be time where we could either potentially pull it off or let town hall know we're not intending to endorse it well before the packet gets put together, or if not, recommend no action on town hall floor, town meeting floor. I'm uneasy cutting it out as much as I'm not
I
fully
know.
on board yet.
So our key questions are, is there residual funding available that's already been appropriated, unspent? So that's a key question. I think another key question is, as we move through the school year, looking at construction, which I know is also the pipeline of construction has taken a hit in the pandemic as well, and occupancy rates of some of the construction. Can we all spend some more time maybe trying to get a better feel for the demand that we think is going to be in place for next year and the year after? In particular, I'm particularly concerned about the deferrals and where they're going to place in. Will they be kindergartners, or will they move on to first grade? How many? We just don't know how many of those there are. I don't know how to get a handle on that, but those are two pieces of information. Given that this came to us in October, I think we just haven't had enough time maybe to kind of individually get comfortable. It's not that we don't see the need, and I think I'm speaking, I'm sure that it's going to be curious down the road for the other boards to wonder where school committees, and I think those are
Yeah.
the two things that we're wrestling with. It's not that there is definitely a need, we just want.
Amanda, I'd be okay with moving it forward. I just want to see if I can articulate and speak clearly one more time, is we're only 2 months into this hybrid experience, right? Already, some families, I don't know what the exact percent, have opted out of public school. If we go, for example, to full remote for everyone, starting in January or February, you may see additional people opt out of public schools. If in May, in June, as they're planning the next school year, we still have uncertainty over what it's going to look like in September, I expect there will be more people opting out of public school. I just think it's a very difficult time to be making those predictions. But we don't know which way it's going to go, so let's move it forward, but monitor it closely as the situation evolves.
Also sounds like the reality is that from the time that this is passed, it would, at the elementary level, it would effectively be 2 full school years before we're able to use it, because we're not going to reconfigure our classes in the middle of the school year.
And I think one of although my planning mind likes to do the study first and then have a plan, and then, I mean, that's sort of how I operate, but my school committee chair mind knows that we are strongly committed to equity this year, and I think to Ms. Parsons' point, I mean, I think the current utilization of the sort of hallways and whatnot tends to be more distributed toward our more marginalized students who, or people who need other services, and we don't want that to be the case either. I mean, we certainly want to support all of our learners equally, and if we're pushing L instruction out into the hallways, and, you know, it's tricky. So, marathon aside for a second, any other capital plan questions or issues? Everybody okay with the truck? The roof, the White House renovation? I'll be really happy if we can put the wetland order of conditions to bed. Oh my goodness, that's been...
And the roof replacement.
And the roof replacement.
We've been trying to put this forward for quite some time.
I'm super grateful that we keep on top of our HVAC maintenance. It has been so important this year, and I'm always happy to see our maintenance. I think we do a good job of that. If there's no other discussion, I will entertain a motion on the capital plan.
So moved.
Second.
Move it as is.
Oh, well, yeah, because we have the opportunity to
Yes.
just put this on our agenda down the road if we want to revisit.
Motion by Nancy to approve the capital plan as presented.
Second.
Second by Meg. All those in favor?
Aye.
Yes.
Aye. So we're moving it forward. Thank you for indulging our conversation. Unfortunately for the audience, we don't get to talk outside of these meetings, so when we have questions or concerns or opinions, we have to share them through all of you at 9:15. So,
Important for the record, though. Thank you.
thank you very much, Ms. Rothermere, for that. Okay, what I'm going to propose, because it is 9:15, I'd like to get through the transportation issues, which are items D and E on our agenda, if that's okay. In that one of our colleagues is not here and wanted to talk about school start times and is also on our policy subcommittee, I'd like to suggest that we defer school start times, item C, as well as old business items A and B until our meeting on Thursday, just a couple short days away. And the school committee self-evaluation is a short discussion, but I think we'll put that off until our whole committee's there because it's an internal conversation. If there are no objections to that, okay. So let's move on to the item D, transportation contract extension. Ms. Rothermere.
Thank you. So the contract for the bus transportation with Connolly is a 3-year contract, this fiscal year being the 3rd year of that 3 years. Within the contract, however, there are 2 one-year optional extensions. So you can see within the memo, the current year rates are $394 for 2 and 3 tier buses and $379 for a 1-tier. FY22, if you exercise that 1-year option, is $402 for 2 and 3 tier and $387 for 1 tier. So it's an increase of $6 and $8 per day per bus. So in just as, collaboration, Connolly has worked very hard with us in all of our changing scenarios that have happened with the district and closing and remote and how many students can be on a bus, et cetera. And it's not really a good time to be putting out a new bid in this economic climate. People could bid to really save their business, bidding high to make sure to pay for days that we could be closed. So again, it's not a good timing. So I'm looking for a recommendation to exercise that one-year option in the contract.
Any questions or discussion? I'll take a motion, if anybody.
So moved.
Motion by Meg to extend the contract by 1 year.
Second.
Second by Nancy. All those in favor?
Aye.
Aye. It's unanimous. Thank you. Item E, the transportation contract amendment.
Again, so similar to what we did in the spring in terms of how to handle the contract with a vendor when we have shut down. And as we talked about in the spring, there are still a going concern for a vendor to be able to stay in business, and are certain elements of our contract that, while they're not transporting currently, are still costs that we should be incurring. So we're into that same type of negotiation. Everyone who works in the state with Connolly, we banded together, and it's the same negotiated rates with all the school districts that use Connolly. So again, you can see within the memo, this one is a little bit different than the spring, whereas in the spring, we were on full shutdown, and the assumption was if we came back, we would go back to full rates. But whereas this year, we can have times where we close down for a day, where we could close down for a couple of days. So they chose kind of that 10-day window, whereas if we close down for less than 10 days, we'll basically pay an adjusted rate for the fuel. But if we close down for more than 10 days, then they would actually put their drivers on furlough, and we would pay a significantly reduced rate. So that scenario is different than what we negotiated in the spring because we weren't kind of there. So I'm looking for authorization to do that same type of contract negotiation that I did in the spring, following these scenarios.
Any questions or comments?
So moved.
Motion by Meg,
A second.
and second by Nancy.
To a quick discussion on it. So
Yeah.
are we saying that in the event of a school closure greater than 10 days, that we pay that lower rate, 192?
Correct.
Okay. Thanks.
Do we have a second motion on the floor? All those in favor?
Yes.
Aye. Did you vote?
Aye.
Okay. It's unanimous. Thank you very much for doing that negotiation. It must be so leisurely to be able to do it in advance and not at the last minute in the middle of a pandemic.
No, it's been ongoing for a little while.
Thank you very much for that. Okay, so we're going to move ahead to second public comment. I don't think we've received any. Have you seen any?
We allow any after
Oh, we don't
5
allow any, right? Future agenda items, we now have a few items from tonight that we're rolling forward to Thursday. We also have, from our first discussion tonight, a conversation about reopening on Thursday. Joe, I'm wondering if you have any updates, no, okay, on having a
Yeah,
briefing on
not yet, yeah.
Hopkins, okay. Any other future agenda items? I think we have lots, we're getting into budget season, so we'll have lots of agenda items. Will be. Items by consensus. Dr. Kavanaugh.
All right, as superintendent, I recommend the school committee approve the items by consensus as outlined in the agenda.
So moved.
Second.
Motion by Meg, second by Joe. All those in favor? Aye. It's unanimous, and it passes. And now I would seek a motion to adjourn.
So moved.
Motion by Meg,
Second.
Oh, he can.
Everybody seconds. Second by Joe. All those in favor?
Aye.
Yes.
Aye. Thank you very much. And again, thank you, Dr. Kavanaugh, for your very informative report tonight. And we will meet again. We have executive session tomorrow night. We are meeting publicly on Thursday at 7 o'clock. We'll be right back here. So thank you, everybody. Have a good night.
All right.
Thank you.
And thank you to HCAM.
Shared power supply.